You're listening to Raised by Spirit, Bloodline by Design, written and narrated by ancestral medium Jenn LaFave. Decree 4. Death reveals the design. Passage 4. A life returned, a prophecy born. It was strange how months passed, how some things shifted so quickly while others refused to move at all. Their finances were gaining stability, and for once, life felt steady. No chaos, no upheaval. Her relationship with her mother began to mend in small, ordinary moments, softened by shared laughter and the early morning conversations that made the past feel less sharp. Jenn cooked dinner for them often, hoping to ease the financial strain they were still climbing out of. Their presence, carried on the scent of simmering meals, moved through the rooms as a soft reminder of where she came from. As always, it was her father she gravitated toward in those moments. Their conversations had deepened, his stories carrying the weight of life lessons and the wisdom shaped by years of endurance, resilience, and an integrity that never wavered. He had always been the steady one, the man who built the world with his own hands and held his family with a strength that would make most people crumble. But when the company fell apart, the loss sank deep. At first it settled into a cold, hardly enough to slow him down, hardly enough to miss work. No one imagined that cold would become the phone call that shattered their world on November 9th, 2003. It was 10 a.m. on a Sunday. Jenn and Rich lay in bed wrapped in the warmth of an easy morning. There was no rush to rise, only a few extra moments of stillness before the day began. Then her phone buzzed. It was her mom, which wasn't unusual for a Sunday morning. "Hey," she answered. "Your dad had a heart attack." Jenn bolted upright. "We're headed to the hospital by ambulance," her mother's voice was shaking. "What hospital?" "St. Mary's," her mother said. She hung up, grabbed her keys, and ran to the car. She couldn't tell you how fast she drove, only that her pulse was louder than the engine and her thoughts were a single, unbroken thread. Don't take him yet. Not now. Not like this. The world narrowed to the road ahead, every turn sharpened by urgency. All she knew was the instinctive need to reach her father. She burst through the hospital doors, the sharp, sterile air slamming into her as if the building itself refused to soften what waited inside. Her mother stood just ahead, pacing, eyes red and unfocused. Jenn ran toward her. "Where is he?" "He's in the back. I don't know anything," her mother said. "He was at the kitchen table doing his time cards for tomorrow. He said he didn't feel well, and when I went to kiss his forehead, he just collapsed." The words spilled out of her mother, unraveling, as she fought to hold herself together. The explanation hit Jenn like a blow to the chest, leaving the world around her suddenly without air. The fear of losing him gathered around them like a storm that knew their weakness. Moments later, the silence shattered as her sister flung open the hospital doors, rushing in, eyes searching for any sign that this was just a dream. "Where is he?" she asked, reaching for Jenn. "He's in the back," Jenn said. The look they exchanged carried more pain than words could. Time held its breath with them as doctors walked past them, nurses drifted in and out, and families whispered around them. But none of it relieved them from the grief gathering. All they could do was sit there, staring at the floor, listening to the relentless ticking of the clock. Finally, the doors opened. "We've moved him to the ICU," the doctor said as he approached. "But he's unresponsive and on life support." The words hit before they even registered. "Can we see him?" Jenn blurted out, her voice cracking as if she could undo what he just said. "Follow me," he said. He led them down the hallway, each step heavier than the one before it, as if the floor itself resisted carrying them toward what waited ahead. When he finally stopped, when his hand pushed open the door, there he was. Tubes wrapped around his body like shadowed vines, claiming something that wasn't theirs to take. Jenn froze. This couldn't be happening. Her mind refused to accept what her eyes were seeing. She and her sister sank into the chairs beside him, breaths shallow as their mother ran to his side. Her hands trembled as she grasped his, as if her touch alone could wake him. "We're here, hun," she whispered. Hours passed. The machines kept beeping, but nothing changed. As the sun sank and moonlight spilled through the hospital windows, her mother barely looked up at her watch, fingers still wrapped around his hand. "Y'all need to get back to the boys," she whispered. Jenn and her sister spoke at the same time, quiet but firm. "We're not leaving." They waited, searching for something. Some sign, some flicker of hope that told them they should stay. That told them they should be there when he woke up. But there wasn't anything. Jenn finally shifted in her chair, glancing at her sister. Neither spoke. It was time to go home. Hours passed after they left, and their mother stayed by his side. The clock kept ticking, steady and indifferent, while her eyes remained fixed on the machines. Eventually, as exhaustion crept in, she leaned forward and kissed his forehead, whispering, "I'm not going anywhere, hun. I'm just going to sit in the chair for a minute and rest my eyes. I'll be right here when you wake up," she whispered. She settled into the chair beside him, still watching him even as her body had nothing else to give. Her eyes closed almost immediately, not because she wanted them to, but because she couldn't stay awake any longer. In the space between one breath and the next, his voice echoed through the room. "I'm at peace." His voice was clear, untouched by sickness. Her breath caught, eyes jolting open. She expected to see his eyes open, yet he remained exactly as he'd been. She sat there, staring at him, waiting, but nothing changed. It didn't take long for the exhaustion to wash over her again, closing her eyes, finally drifting into sleep. The next morning, Jenn returned to the hospital just as the doctor walked in. He stood before them rigid, his voice void of sympathy. "There's no brain activity. There's nothing else we can do," he said. He exhaled sharply, as if the weight of delivering such news had worn thin with repetition. "We don't expect him to last long on the ventilators, and patients in this state are the last to be tended to. We suggest you say your goodbyes now." His tone was flat and absolute, finality woven into every syllable. Jenn stood there, frozen, as one by one everyone faded from the room, leaving her alone with her father. The weight in her chest was unbearable. She sat beside him, her breath uneven, holding back a whimper as she fought for words. "I love you," she choked out. "More than I ever said, more than I could ever put into words. If I could do anything to bring you back, I will. Just tell me what to do. If it means never having more children just so I could take care of you, I'll do it. I'll do anything." She sobbed, knowing there was no plea, no bargain, no sacrifice that could shift what was inevitable. She rested her forehead against his hand, the heaviness of farewell stealing her voice. "I don't want to say this. I don't want you to go, but if you have to—" "I understand," her voice faltered. She took a deep breath, gripping his hand tighter. "I will take care of everyone. I will make sure your grandkids know your name, know who you are. Every story, every memory, every piece of wisdom, they will carry you with them. Always. I will keep your legacy alive. I promise," she exhaled, tears falling freely. She sat there, sobbing into his hand, pouring every ounce of love and sorrow into the words she never thought she'd have to say. When she finally looked up at him, tears were streaming down his face. She whispered, barely more than a breath, "Daddy, if you can hear me, squeeze my hand." And then she felt it, a deliberate squeeze. And without warning, his voice rose to answer her. "Don't worry, sweetheart. It's going to be okay. I'm at peace. I've stepped out of my body, but it's not time for my body to be at rest. Soon you'll understand. I'm staying until your mother's okay. I love you and I love your sister, and nothing, not even death, can separate us." You would think such grand gestures of reassurance would bring comfort. At the time, they didn't. If anything, they made the reality sharper, the grief more unbearable. In the days that followed, the family moved her mother and every piece of her parents' life into Jenn's house, yet her mother was never there. She spent every waking moment at his bedside, refusing to let him fall to the bottom of anyone's list. But in the rare moments she sat in Jenn's kitchen, the weight of it all broke through as she sobbed. "I don't understand why God is not listening to me. This is my fault. I should have become a missionary. God is punishing me for falling in love with him instead of spreading his word," she cried out. Jenn sat as her mother's pain flowed, the shadows of deception rising around her like a slow, gathering storm. Her mother's pain was a kind she'd never known, a grief that reshaped existence as she knew it. She knew her mother was wrong, but the sorrow they were moving through held no space for correction. Instead, in those moments, she sat beside her quietly, listening as her mother wept. Until one evening, still caught in the shadows of her despair, she turned to Jenn, her voice heavy with grief, and said, "This will happen to you too someday." Jenn met her mother's inaccuracy head-on. "No, it won't," she said. "Because destiny doesn't ask who deserves mercy or who is strong enough to endure what is destined to be. It simply unfolds as designed." In the eye of the storm, just 3 months into her father's coma, in February of 2004, Jenn and Rich were jarred awake in the middle of the night by the ringing of the phone. It was Marie, Kevin's estranged wife. Her voice exploded through the line as Jenn answered. "Kevin's been murdered," Marie screamed. Her heart sank. She shook Rich awake, pressing the phone to his ear. "What happened?" "They killed him. Left in an alley. Rich, he's gone." She watched the color drain from Rich's face, the words hitting like a blow that was impossible to brace for. They sat in a silence carved out of shock, their thoughts racing too fast to hold, like trying to grasp smoke in your hands. The days after unraveled into a stillness that felt both inevitable and unbearable. Laying Kevin to rest felt like burying a piece of the divine spark itself. The months that followed drifted by in a slow, aching blur, each day dimming a little more than the last. Then came May 3rd, 2004. That night, wrapped in her grandmother's blanket, Jenn slipped into sleep and found herself carried into a dream that felt more like a doorway to heaven. Her father stood before her, strong, whole, and magnificent, holding a baby wrapped in blue. A white and blue flame surrounded him like air, divine and complete, his entire form shining like a white silhouette traced in living fire. He looked as if he'd stepped out of creation itself. With a smile that felt like a blessing, he lowered the baby into her arms as if entrusting her with something holy. There was a presence within this baby so radiant, it seemed as though heaven had gathered all its light into a single vessel and allowed her to hold it for one sacred moment. She woke speechless, no name for what she'd just experienced. She'd only just begun her morning, the scent of coffee rising in the kitchen, when her phone lit up with her sister's name. "You're not going to believe the dream I had last night," her sister said. "I saw Daddy." In her dream, she explained, she stepped into the living room, and there he was, seated in his old recliner, looking stronger and more alive than he had in years. "Come here, sweetheart, sit with me," he said, his voice steady, in a way she hadn't heard since childhood. She hesitated, then moved toward him, her breath caught between fear and longing. He sighed, shaking his head with that familiar smirk, the one that always meant he saw straight through her. "You know," he said softly, "you're the part of me I'm proudest of." Her chest tightened, the truth of it settling into places she'd kept locked away for years. "Stubborn as hell," he added with a warm laugh. "Just like me. That's why we clashed. Same heat, same heart, same fire." He paused, and something in him shifted, his expression softening into something she'd never seen fully in life. "Listen to me," he said. "I love you with everything I am. Do you hear me? Even when—" her voice cracked. "Always, baby." "I wish I told you I loved you more," she said. "You didn't have to," he said, his voice warm and absolute. "Different lessons for different children. Never a difference in love. Not ever. Remember this. I'm always with you and always watching. I love you, and nothing, not even death, can separate us." "I understand," she whispered. He nodded, leaning back, the chair creaking just as it had in life. "Good," he said. Though the dream dissolved, what remained was him, his love, and his promise, a promise written into her life long before she ever understood what it meant. 2 weeks passed as their dreams wove themselves into the quiet spaces of waiting, but on May 17th, 2004, her mother sat by his side for one last time. She sat beside him and gathered his hand into hers, the hand that had steadied her life from the moment their paths first crossed, the hand that had carried strength without ever turning hard, loved without conditions, devotion without demand. In the dim glow of the room, she leaned close, her voice trembling with the truth of a lifetime lived side by side. "My love, You've given me everything. You've carried me, held me, protected me, chosen me every day of our life together. I don't know how to do this without you, but if you need to leave, if you need to rest, it's okay. You can go. I'm forever yours. Faithfully, she whispered. The words were a surrender, a final act of love so profound it tore something open inside her. To let him go was to break. To break was to love him enough to choose his peace over her own. After a lifetime of shared breath and 6 months in a coma, he slipped from this world with the same dignity and grace he had lived by. The room didn't shake. The earth didn't roar. But something in the universe shifted, subtle and irreversible, as if a pillar had been removed from the architecture of creation itself. Then came the phone call. Jenn had been woken by that sound before, pulled from sleep into grief without warning. She answered without speaking a word. He's gone. He passed a little while ago, she said, barely holding herself together. At 2:35 a.m., the same time we were married 33 years ago, she wailed. The phone slid from her hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. Her body followed. Her knees buckled, striking the ground hard, the cold surface rising to meet her like a world that no longer knew how to hold her. Her breath broke. Her chest caved. She reached for her grandmother's blanket, curled into it, and sobbed until her breath fractured, desperate for the comfort it had always carried. But this time, nothing came. The days that followed, leading up to his services, felt hollow. Yet Jeremy still needed her, still reached for her with tiny hands untouched by grief. In her sorrow, she wiped her tears before stepping into his room each morning. She held them back as she smiled for him when he laughed, when he babbled, when he clung to her with complete certainty. Then the day of final goodbyes arrived, and the entire world shifted. That day she found her mother standing before the open closet, staring at the clothes, unable to make a choice. It was such a simple choice. Yet grief turns even the smallest decisions into mountains, each one heavy with meaning, each one demanding more strength than she had left. Suddenly, Maggie's voice whispered a gentle reminder. In our bloodline, we rise in bright colors to celebrate the life, offering the warmth of our remembrance as their soul returns. Jenn hesitated for a moment, then gently reached for the dress hanging near the front. Red, she said softly. Daddy always loved this color on you. He did, didn't he? She whispered. I think you should wear that one, Jenn said, leaving her to make her choice. Shortly after, her mother stepped into the dining room, wrapped in red. Jenn watched as she reached for the roses she'd bring to his service, each stem lifted with the quiet devotion of a family preparing their final goodbyes. Roses were his favorite, her mother whispered, mind distant, heavy with grief. He always gave them to you, Jenn said softly, stepping closer. There was a stillness in the room then, a hush that felt holy, as if the universe had positioned itself to respond to their final tribute. Here, stand next to them, she said. I'll take a picture of you beside the roses before we go. Her mother didn't question it. She simply stepped into place, silent and unmoving, as Jenn closed the blinds and pressed the shutter. Days later, when the film was developed, Jenn gasped. There was a light beside her mother, not a flicker, not a trick of the lens, a perfectly shaped silhouette, his shape, his unmistakable presence, standing right beside her. It was impossible to ignore, impossible to deny. It was like the universe had opened for a single heartbeat, allowing love to make itself visible. Her mother stared at the photo, eyes wide, lips parted as if words wanted to rise but couldn't find their way out. Astonishment washed over her mother, but beneath it lived something deeper. It was a moment without language where Destiny asked, Do you remember? 6 months earlier, he had told her he was at peace. And he was. He never suffered. He was waiting until you were ready, Jenn explained. Her sister stepped forward, using the moment of silence to share the dreams they had, where he still lived, radiant, whole, and untouched by death. Yet she refused to listen. It was as if she had been swallowed in an emptiness no one could reach. Grief didn't just weigh her down, it consumed her. The love of her life was gone, and with him went the only parts of her that had ever felt safe, steady, and whole. Barely 2 weeks had passed since she'd laid her father to rest when her dream began to reveal his message. She was pregnant, And in that moment, his promise began to take shape. 9 months later, their second son arrived on February 3rd, 2005. Not by coincidence, by design. 235. A quiet encryption placed at the crossroads of endings and beginnings, loss and renewal, death and rebirth. It marked the hour he was married. It marked the hour he left this world. It marked the hour his grandson arrived. She didn't know it yet, but she wouldn't simply follow this pattern. She would move through prophecy.